Well, all right then, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It is a pleasure to welcome you here at the round table dedicated to the international oil market pricing evolution, new benchmarks, currencies, and settlement technologies. This is a thrilling time. Yesterday, they talked about the situation on energy markets. Now that the competition is very acute, it is important that we that we define new competitive advantages and identify new opportunity windows, because that will be associated with ways to use euros as a new oil market benchmark. We have a lot of relevant issues and we only have an hour and 15 minutes, but let's hope we'll have enough time to discuss them all. All panelists will observe time, and a kind request from the interpreters. Simultaneous translation is rendered at this event, and they will need to translate everything, so please don't rush when you speak. Well, let's hope this will be a lively discussion, and we will keep it very concrete and specific rather than saying holistic and generic words. Now, I would like to turn the floor to the a well-known person, Anatoly Golomolzin, Deputy Head Federal Anti-Monopoly Service of the Russian Federation. As Russia can clarify a lot of issues under these circumstances. So, what is your agency going to do to support euros on its way to becoming an international benchmark? Over to you. Thank you. Well, this round table is very relevant. Let's hope this will be a fruitful discussion. The Federal Anti-Monopoly Service is one of the initiators of the evolution of the current pricing instruments, including international markets. And we've been cooperating and coordinating our activities with our peer agencies from other countries worldwide. We've been interacting with financial regulators, including our colleagues working for IOCO, and it's important. I'd like to emphasize that this is not a pinpoint effort to us. In Russia, the oil market pricing is a matter of government policy. In the end of last year, the president issued an order defining main areas of the government policy. And the development and pursuance of transparent pricing was defined one of the main priorities for the government. And we are talking about market mechanisms of pricing, expert trading, and formation of a benchmark for Russian crude. Naturally, the formation of benchmark alone for export crude would not constitute a success unless it's a part of a system of transparent pricing, not just externally but internally for both markets. And we have made great strides in that direction. And in particular, in Russia, they've been publishing exchange indicators and extra exchange indicators on a regular basis. Roughly 20% of that commodity is exchange traded and supplied to the domestic market. We've launched derivatives trading for exchange trading for crude and oil products, and we've launched futures contracts for euros. And now we are working hard to define liquidity for that market. We've been involved in a dialogue with all the parties concerned, and at the same time at the Moscow exchange, we've launched for a mini brand for WTI on the futures market. Well, we did that for indices, and now the two exchange floors are collaborating in order to launch a similar trading for Urals, and they've been discussing ESPO as well. There are prerequisites for that because we've been publishing price indices on a regular basis for oil and products for the domestic and international markets. So there is a solid basis for the calculations of a credible index, and the collaboration of all the parties concerned should help us hope that the roadmaps approved by the government and the exchange committee will be used, and in 2018 or 19 we will start regular trading of the contracts. Let us hope that that will become a benchmark for international trade. Well, thank you, Anatoly. So in other words, you believe that within a couple of years that will become a full-scale benchmark for international markets? Within a couple of years we are going to attain parameters which should allow it to become an international benchmark. Well, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Now I would like to turn the floor to Kirill Molodtsov. He's assistant to the chief of presidential staff. He has a great expertise in the management of these issues. In your opinion, now that markets are very volatile from the standpoint of geopolitics, what do you see on them? Well, thank you so much. I haven't noticed too much tension on the markets, but on a serious note. Anyway, 2 years ago when the Presidential Commission had a session at the Kremlin, and one of the tasks was to define a set of actions to promote a Russian or crude benchmark, which is what the government had been working on actually. That task has been attained. There is a plan, the actions have been defined, and the action plan is comprehensible, and all those who have to work understand it, but there is just one little tiny problem. The accomplishments thus far are highly satisfactory, so there is no reason to say that we've done all of the work, so there are certain things to tweak. So we have a lot to discuss here. We have group of professionals here, peers from Platts, who are very knowledgeable about the definition of benchmarks, so probably there are subtle things that might require corrections. What we could assume, what could we do? We started. We first targeted Primorsk, the port of Primorsk, where Urals is transshipped. We trade Urals. More than 220 million tons via pipe, and plus there are railroad shipments as well. As far as I'm concerned, such volumes of Urals affect the market, which is what we have been witnessing. Treaties Russia is a part to, including OPEC Plus, witness that our offer with our annual production is a serious factor impacting the market. And a benchmark is an indicative index which should be defined as a benchmark. Remember, there is a benchmark of 1 kilo. It's stored in the measurements chamber in Paris, and there must be something. It might be SPO or Primorsk or Urals, but the volume should be less. And this is a thing to talk about and dispute, but it is highly probable that both WTI and Brent and or Russian grade, the notion of Russian grade, may be associated with smaller volumes. It might have some specific properties, and this is what we'll have to do. For instance, we could use sour crude as a benchmark, but it's important that we define the basis for the realization of that program. So that is the approach to discuss and assess, I think. But from the standpoint of the Presidential Commission and the President himself, this is a matter subject to subsequent monitoring monitoring. And as Anatoly said, we have 2 years to launch everything and make everything work. I hope that our peers from the exchange and the colleagues who have entered into that agreement will take part in that work. Definitely, I would like to invite not just our major oil traders handling working in the Russian Federation on the basis of long-term contracts, but smaller traders, spot market traders, to be a part of that work. So there are ways for us to involve participants of exchange trading and financial folks in that framework. So that is the job in hand as far as I am concerned for a couple of years. Kirill, in your opinion, must there be any initiative imposed from the very top, I mean, by the government, to zap this whole thing, if you know what I mean? Well, I don't think the budget has any money for that task, but initiative is always a thing to welcome. But, an initiative is no order for major players in Russia to get more involved in the process, all right, let's recoup. Well, the task is to look back at what we have done, which isn't what we have been doing in the latest months. So, and we need to understand, have we been successful? I guess we have to a certain extent, but there is no full satisfaction, and orders are always a dangerous thing. Well, the players seem to have reservations. Why? Because full-time inclusion. Well, I remember at the time when they started grain trading or lumber trading. That is normal, I'm telling you. It's a matter of supply and demand. And if there is liquidity, well, results will follow. With your permission, I'd like to add a word or two. Well, in 2017, in December 2017, the president signed an order, and then there was a directive by the government approving the roadmap for that. There is a section dedicated to oil and products. It concerns the development of exchange trading, and all the organizations concerned are enlisted there. With the market economy, it is the task of a government to develop market, which is what our government has been doing. There is going to be an exchange committee session right after this meeting where we will discuss details of the roadmap, and all the parties concerned will work hard to realize that process. Well, the preparatory stage is over, and all the parties concerned have a full understanding of the issue. It is a priority to the government. It is the essence of the state economy policy. It's not just one facet of it. So the development of a benchmark is a given because all the parties concerned are interested in it. Companies, market players, infrastructure organizations, including Transneft. Everybody is now moving in a new dimension. And in 2018 or 19, the results should be expected, very practical results. Well, that is a splendid thing that the government is unanimous in confirming that all the conditions are there. That it might not be enough, but that is one of the prerequisites. And now I would like to ask our foreign peers at what can be done. Ladies and gentlemen, Owen Johnson has a lot of experience in the operations in the Dubai exchange. So could you share your experience? How fast could we expect that? And is there anything unique that might help or hinder Urals becoming a major benchmark?
So I would say, firstly, I have a lot of respect for the work that ΣΠbMTS has done, and I think it's an excellent contract. I speak to a lot of people, and no one has an issue with the contract. I think the contract is really, really well designed, and it's something that you should be proud of. There is always a limit to what an exchange can do. We are, at CME Group, the world's largest exchange. but we can't make people trade. We can't force liquidity. So where does liquidity come from? It comes from the risk that underlies a market. It comes from physical underlying risk. If I have a contract with Matthew and we want to hedge, we use the contract. But if I have a contract on a different basis, we won't hedge on that contract. So you need to generate the underlying physical risk. And that's something an exchange, however good, whether it's CME, DME, SPIMEX, this is difficult for exchanges. This is really a role for the oil companies and for the government. So it was very positive to hear what the government representatives were saying. If you think about the development of the Brent market, for example, the Brent market failed on the exchange 3 times. Why did it finally succeed? Because the government used the Brent as a tax reference price. So they created the physical risk. You need the physical risk to underpin the work that CME or SPIMEX does. Without the physical risk, we come last as the exchange. Sadly, we think we're important people, but we are the last part of the jigsaw. First comes the physical risk, then comes the need for hedging, then comes the exchange. So I think you have all the conditions for success. You have fantastic physical volumes at Primorsk. You have an excellent contract built by SPIMEX. What you're missing is the physical risk. So if I had any advice, it would be generate the physical risk, because the derivatives will be a function of that, and they will be a multiple of the underlying physical risk. WTI trades around 40 times the physical risk. Dubai Mercantile Exchange trades maybe 6 to 8 times the physical risk. You have a huge potential, given the size of your physical risk, if you can transfer that risk to the exchange.
Ну, это, наверное, сейчас ключевая тема.
Well, I guess that's a key topic these days. Risk and liquidity. Yes, yeah, right you are. This is indeed what we are missing. Alexei, would you care to comment that main topic? Because, everybody is very keen about the exchange. Well, you have been working hard, but there have been no supply contracts thus far. What say you? Good morning. You know, we've been working on that for a couple of years already. And naturally, in the beginning, everything seemed impossible, unrealistic. And everybody was asking the question, why bother? And then the government, at the presidential level, the president himself and the presidential commission, they declared their intentions, and they said that, yes, this is important, indeed important. It needs to be done. That was the first push, the first shove, which helped us to start getting the momentum and start working on that contract, because naturally an exchange can come up with a contract, can generate a contract. The shipment contract for export euros, the technology itself behind the approach is similar to what people are doing elsewhere for Dubai shipment contract, the Chinese shipment contract. So we aren't going to reinvent the wheel, but the simplicity of that contract is simultaneously the source of challenges associated with initiation of liquidity, because a substantial part of liquidity is generated by the player, which the Chinese contract is a good example of. But unless there is primary liquidity, no player will ever come to you, and the liquidity has to be generated by principal market players, Russian producers in our case, and major international traders trading per that contract. That first initiation of liquidity is yet to take place. But, well, let me tell you what we expect to do and what we plan to do in the future. Well, it's been 2 years since we launched the contract, and quite a lot of important events have taken place since then. Well, first of all, it might sound funny, but well, we did require time, and time has physically passed, giving Russian companies an opportunity to re-architect, restructure their business processes and start formation of their units capable of trading. Well, companies needed time to nurture talent, and they needed time to reshape their documentation. And, well, it is evident that Russian companies have made great strides in that direction. Some are ahead of others are trailing behind, but strides have been made. Well, that means that they had time to prepare, to get ready, and those who wanted to get ready did get ready. Well, and those 2 years helped us debottleneck some elements, such as interaction with the customs, ways to use electronic contracts for customs clearance. The Central Bank of Russia issued a lot of important documents for currency regulations, which helped simplify our dealings with clearing organization. Certain strides have been made in the taxation area. Well, there is one yet more issue to tackle, which foreign participants of the trading find quite painful. The Russian, withholding tax. We do hope that that issue will be cleared as well, in which case operations on the Russian derivatives market will be competitive, as competitive from the standpoint of the taxation as operations on the leading trading floors are. So, but if we want people to come to Russia and trade here, we need to create a regime, taxation regime comparable with best international practice. What's next? Well, this is what everybody is concerned about. Well, in the beginning of the session, you mentioned the role of the government. Is the government supposed to do something? Does it want to do something? I think that the time is now good to discuss this topic. Well, the presidential order, national plan for the stimulation of competition, the roadmap approved by the government in the beginning of August, very specific plans with deadlines and owners. It's not a plan for 5 to 10 years. It is a plan for 2018, 2019, and 2020. And it reflects the vision of what has to happen from the standpoint of the government. And, shipments, we should push them. And synchronization is important too. It would be strange if only one company entered the market while the rest stood aside. So synchronization is important, and we need to coordinate. Both the Ministry of Energy and the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service have to do their jobs. There have been certain positive accomplishments. When it comes to pure market tools now available to the exchange, then I guess many of you are aware that we've been experimenting with our shipment contracts for euros. In addition to that, we experiment with new ideas and mechanisms. For instance, after this session, we are going to sign a memorandum with Platts, the world's leading pricing agency. The subject of that memorandum, we will sign it to search for new ideas and implement new ideas that might be useful in the context of world crude pricing. We've been working with the Moscow exchange, and we are trying to design a new contract for euros, but we are still missing that underlying asset which should help us launch that contract. that cash-settled contract. So, as far as the rest is concerned, I think, well, what we do resembles what people do elsewhere. Well, other people look for new reference points. It's not just us experimenting, but, well, they perform experiments at Platts and Argus, and new ideas are being discussed. How best to change Brent, how best to reshape it. Our peers in China have been working hard to apply mechanisms they have created for real pricing. Thus far, that is a mechanism for people involved in financial speculations. That's an interesting asset. They've been working it. That's a splendid step ahead, but that's not the end of the journey from the standpoint of pricing in China. And so we are part of the mainstream. The world is searching for reference points, and in 3 to 5 years they will find such points. Is euros going to be one of them? Yes, probably. We are working on that. This is what we desire. This is what we strive for. Is euros going to be a part of an overall portfolio? Yes, that is possible too. And that is why it is so interesting to talk with our peers from world's leading agencies. But the main principle is you work and results will follow. We want to work. We think this is accomplishable and will strive for that.
And thank you very much for the enthusiasm that you are contributing, because thanks of you, we really see the developments more than it's been planned. Joe Henley, I'd like to ask you about these pricing agencies working with the main benchmarks, the fate future of the Brent, and are you ready to support a brand, Urals as the world benchmark, new world benchmark? Thank you.
Спасибо вам. Первое, я очень хотел бы...
First of all, I would like I'd like to thank you for this discussion. Now I switch to English.
Say that the role of price reporting agencies in assessing prices is critical, but it's the market that really creates the benchmarks. To Owen Johnson's point, it requires risk, it requires a physical exposure. And the way that Mr. Golomozin says that the environment is now being created in order to make that a more fertile ground for a benchmark is very encouraging indeed. A benchmark really, and I've said this before, is a product of trust. It has to be transparent, it has to be liquid. People need to be able to understand they can get in and out of trades. There has to be somebody on the other side. And dated Brent is obviously a great example of that. After a difficult start 30 years ago, as Owen said. But where there is risk, there is exposure, and where there is exposure, there is a desire to hedge it. Benchmarks evolve, and that's also what's important. I mean, the first attempt at the Urals benchmark should be seen as a good start, but naturally these things take time. Dated Brent over the years has created huge exposure. We say maybe 60% of the world's crude currently prices off it. But you know, the North Sea market, or the North Sea supply, is dwindling. There is less supply there now than there used to be, of course. And over the years, Platts has added to strengthen that benchmark. We still have every confidence in it, but it, like many things, it needs tending, it needs looking after. So we've added more grades over the years. We've added price adjustment mechanisms over the years. And just recently, we've announced a potential new evolution where we are considering introducing delivered grades into the benchmark, so not just a free on-board benchmark. And that gives the opportunity to perhaps introduce grades from around the world. The explosion in demand for WTI, once, you know, well, it is a great benchmark, but the fact that it now goes waterborne gives it the opportunity to be a truly international benchmark again, whereas it previously was a landlocked benchmark based at Cushing, Oklahoma. That volume can't be ignored. That's nearly 2 million barrels a day being pushed out into the world, and it's a liquidly traded, very well-backed contract on the exchange, and now it has the physical exposure internationally to really be something special again. Now, to potentially, as I say, that we published a subscriber note on Monday last week in Singapore, and I encourage you to look at that on our website. We are considering bringing other grades into the mix, because a benchmark based on an area of dwindling supply could easily become a benchmark based on demand, on delivered crude. So again, benchmarks evolve, and Brent is just one example. Urals has the potential to be another major benchmark, I agree. I mean, we at Platts have published literally thousands of indications, bids, offers and transactions on Urals crude oil, traditionally on a SIF delivered basis. But there is a potential to publish more free on board indications should the market so desire to see that, but it takes that market desire. Of course, there is the intention of government, the intention of the exchanges, and of course, it's no bad thing for a price reporting agency as well. But I think it's fair to say that there has to be a desire for that to be there, and I think it has every chance. I really do.
Спасибо. И если я могу попросить...
And Matthew, maybe you, as a representative of Argus, say a few words about this. And specifically, I am interested on Shanghai exchange, its experience, and the trading and settlements in yuan.
Let me start just touching on Urals and Brent before moving to Shanghai. I think it's very appropriate that Russia
Can you speak to the
Sorry.
mic?
I think it's very appropriate that Russia is looking to generate a domestically traded benchmark here. I think with the experience I have from the DME, working with Owen in the past, and looking at INE, there's an opportunity to create an economic infrastructure which creates jobs, which creates the environment for growth. So I think the ambition is very fair. I think it's also worth saying, to Joel's point, Urals in a lot of ways is a benchmark already. I mean, it is used as a reference by a lot of people. So the step to taking it to a financially traded contract with a futures market behind it is perhaps smaller than you might have for other benchmarks. And finally on Urals, and to Owen's point, I think there does need to be some incentive or push. So people need the exposure, but you've got to get it going. So if you look at all the other successful futures contracts, they've either had market makers, or they've had a taxation policy, or they've had something to get them going. So I think it just needs something to trigger that start. From a price reporting agency perspective, and I'm sure Joel would agree, we see our relationship with exchanges as very symbiotic. We work in an environment together. We don't see ourselves as head-to-head competitors. So we're very keen to work with Russia and SPbMTSB to do what we can to help support the ambitions, which we think are perfectly appropriate. I think to the second point, to Brent, I think we'd agree with Joel. I think declining production in the North Sea has led to the demand for change in that benchmark, with more volume to come in. And the obvious volume to come in is delivered light sweet crude from outside the North Sea region. I think the growth of exports from the US, particularly WTI from Houston, is a natural candidate to go into that basket, and that's certainly something that Argus is exploring to expand that benchmark. Thinking about Urals and potential Urals participation, one of the challenges is the quality. So it is a light sweet benchmark Brent, whereas Urals is more heavy and more sour. So it's not a natural fit. But therefore, I think that gives Urals the potential to be a standalone benchmark for the region, reflecting export crude out of Russia into the international markets, and that's where the link comes together. I think finally, to come to the INE in China, I spoke about the domestic ambitions. I think it makes a lot of sense for the Chinese to look to build that infrastructure. They want to grow their economy. They want to see commodity trading markets. I think it's a very early days for that contract. And I think the challenge is to get international participation in what is a very domestically focused contract. And in some regards, the structure of that contract makes it very difficult for international participants to sell into that contract. So there may need to be some tweaks in the future if they want to become truly international.
Обращаясь к тому, что вы сказали, кто должен все-таки...
As to Urals, who will give this push to Urals so that it can become benchmark?
Probably three main ways for it to happen. One is government, so either through tax or through direct pressure on government entities to participate. The second is financial, spending money, so investing in market makers to come and actually post bids and offers to take risk positions, to Owen's point earlier, so they have exposure. So you're effectively paying them to take that risk. Finally, a natural evolution is possible, but you really need to try and find the inflection point that is going to change the game. And it's quite hard to see that now. They do come from time to time, but you don't know what they're going to be, and it could be a long wait. So I think naturally people look for something that they have control over, and that tends to be around regulation, legislation, or financial incentives.
May I add there?
Please.
Excuse me. I think what's also critical is the international adoption. I think that's what SPIMEX will need. Domestic exchanges and domestic contracts are interesting. We see that with China, but I think to really become an international benchmark, you need international exposure. And I know that there was a certain reticence in the past from international companies, both global majors and also trading houses. I'm sure Mr. Quatermain can inform us more on that in a moment. But there needs to be the buy-in from the international community, and whether that's through currency, through a perceived lack of risk in dealing with Russia, which of course we heard yesterday from President Putin is of course a major factor at the moment. I think it's critical to have that international buy-in.
По поводу риска я бы еще хотел.
As for risks, well, surely, economically speaking, it's the main important point. So this risk, what is the source of this risk? Well, today, the perception of Russian companies of risk is that, well, they have no risk. They trade according to some formula based on price, long-term contracts and short-term tenders on Russian export oil. They are and we see this impression that there is no risk, because each time oil is traded on the market at a market price at the time of shipment. But we know anyway that it's not so, because you have an average price for the month, then minus this average differential. Anyway, it's some sort of a formula, and the understanding, the perception, or the lack of perception that it is a risk, this is the main problem. Because when price is changing, when it's going down, when the risk is, well, all of a sudden materialized, then Russian companies say, okay, our foreign counterparts, they were hedged, we are not. And of course, there is no risk in terms of relations between the Russian oil price and taxes. If there is some disconnect, for example, taxes are calculated according to one formula, but the realization or the selling according to another, we have these risks. It's a very complex question, because of course, the Ministry of Finance was asking the question, who is the first, a hen or an egg, and saying, let's get tacked to Brent. And when we don't have liquidity, it's very dangerous to do, because we know that the budget can have problems as well. So we have to make this step, and without the will of the government, it's impossible. What arguments do you have in order to convince the Ministry of Finance not to be afraid of acting? Well, you know, the argument is quite simple. And sadly, it's not that easy calculated. You know, as for budget, everything is easy. Just show me plus or minuses for budgets. And to have the dialogue in this way is not that easy. We have to change the paradigm. And our experience with Dubai exchange shows that Russian companies today, well, as a rule, they don't have their trading business, and Russian companies simply sell oil without commercial thing. But anyway, trading is about the selling and buying, and of course here we have to create trading business. as a reverse side of what we do on stock exchange. Stock exchange cannot develop without us to be able to use all the instrument tools and hedging in order to succeed on the market. We think that there is a component of, status of benchmark is good to have, but it will come when later. But the first component is an additional plus from trading. I'd like to give the floor to the representative of Shell, Mark Quatermain, to give his vision. Well, since you work on spot and derivatives market, how do you see? You know that you are very active and support the development of Urals as benchmark. What do you see the future of this, and are you ready to participate in this process, becoming turning Urals into benchmark? Thank you.
So perhaps,
The micro.
Okay, thank you. So perhaps an introduction, first of all, to set the context. So I indeed work for Shell, have done for my entire life, have worked for Shell for 35 years, and have worked in the trading business for 25 of those 35 years. So I have seen over that 25-year period both the evolution of our business here in Russia and indeed the evolution of oil price benchmarks, whether in crude or, of course, in products, and I've traded in both, and indeed in gas. I was actually a key driver of Shell setting up its business, its trading business at least, in Russia just over a decade ago. So we showed our commitment then to Russia, as we do across the whole barrel, and I'm very proud of the operation that we have here. And so, of course, we've taken a huge amount of interest in the development of the ΣΠbMTSB contract, and my good colleague Tom Horer, sitting elsewhere in the room here, has been a major participant in the efforts to establish the various contracts on ΣΠbMTSB, and we congratulate ΣΠbMTSB, of course, for the success certainly in the domestic products markets, which I think has helped provide a super clearing platform for products, and of course wish every success in the efforts around Urals, which we'll turn to shortly. I think it's a number of comments have already been made, which I will just build upon, or try and build upon, which I think are relevant to the conversation about Urals. I think a couple of comments were made earlier about the key to a successful benchmark, and I'll use some of the same words. Representative. It has to be representative for people who are refiners and producers in the region. It has to be transparent, and it has to be, so people have to have trust in it, and there has to be liquidity. And I've heard a lot of comments in the last half an hour about whether it's exchange or whether it's non-exchange benchmark, whether it's through a price reporting agency or whether it's through an exchange, that it's a place for people to offset risk. And that is absolutely true between refiners and producers and traders and people in the value chain. I would also argue that very often the reason why the liquidity, which can obviously be sometimes the key issue, why sometimes it fails, is because it doesn't attract speculators. You need people who want to take on the risk as well as people who want to offset the risk. Otherwise, it becomes a very flat market and a very low liquidity. So I do think that's quite key to the development of any benchmark, and it's been key to the benchmarks which perhaps have been successful and indeed the ones which have failed. And there are many, many examples of attempts at benchmarks and indeed attempts at exchanges, exchange contracts where there has been failure. So it is a place where you have to strive. And we also have talked in the last half an hour, and again the clue to perhaps the success or otherwise of Urals, you have to get that kickstart. And I think there were good comments made earlier about Brent, for example, in terms of there was a government kickstart in the form of a tax reference price, which was very much the thing that got things going as far as that particular market is concerned. But there is also a need for constant evolution. And I personally recall being heavily involved around the turn of this century, around 2000, 2001, where the Brent benchmark went through just that transformation. And it was quite a shock at the time, the incorporation of 40s and the incorporation of Oseberg as the Brent market declined, and it required that bolstering of other grades. And Brent as a benchmark, whether it's through the price reporting agencies or whether it's through the exchanges, has had to go through a constant evolution since then. So kickstart and evolution will be hallmarks of any sustainable benchmark going forward. And I believe Urals will have those same challenges and opportunities going forward. The exchanges today, so the benchmarks today around the world, and we are significant traders as Shell Trading on our group of companies across the world, in every part of the world, whether it's in the North American benchmarks, whether it's the new evolving INE and our efforts to be involved in that, which we are being, whether it's in Dubai, and we've talked about that earlier, or of course whether it's back in North Sea, we are significant risk takers, but also risk offsetters on those various benchmarks. I think one of the key things, we talked also about inflection points, may be about to face us. And I'd like to throw that into the conversation. And it may be where Urals has its opportunity, and that is around IMO 2020. Because IMO 2020, none of us can forecast exactly how that will play out in terms of its effect on prices. And I'm certainly not going to put my crystal ball on the table here and give you those forecasts. But what I do believe it's going to do is create an extra potential source of volatility. There's a huge amounts of unknowns, and a lot of people looking at a lot of other people to see how they'll react. Will people put more scrubbers on ships to allow more high sulfur fuel oil to be burnt, or will the refineries make more changes to their configurations to produce less high sulfur fuel oil? That's going to have consequences for crude pricing. We don't know where that will go, but it also potentially creates more opportunities for other benchmarks to be developed when that volatility comes into play. So I think that inflection point is potentially upon us. We can't predict how it's going to roll out, but I do think it is something which has to be taken into consideration as people are thinking about if you're really pushing to create this sustainable benchmark for FOB Urals.
Марк, что нужно Shell для того, чтобы...
What Shell needs to expand its entry into Russia and support what is being done by SPyMex to become full-fledged player. Well, in cooperation with your company, of course, it's everything here: liquidity, problem, risk. But for Shell,
we follow the development of these exchanges very, very carefully, and there has to be obviously a need in the first instance, and I've talked about the fact that I think earlier on it was talked about things like withholding tax, for example. So I think we continue, and our involvement in SPyMex belies this or supports this. We continue to work with SPyMex, as I know other parties do, to try and remove the barriers for all participants to play a role in that contract. So I'd rather not go into the details of what Shell is looking for, but I would simply say we continue, as we do with all of the exchanges and indeed all of the PRAs, whilst we're not trying to tell people how they should price their crude, and we're not trying to say how benchmarks should be constructed, we certainly always offer an opinion in terms of what stops us trading on an exchange, or why we wouldn't price off a particular quotation. That is always key to us, and we will continue to play an active role in SPyMex. And again, what I shared earlier, certainly our involvement to date, I think, is a signal of that commitment.
Спасибо. I
would like now to turn to a Russian company, active participation on the market, supporting all the initiatives by MySex. I know that Tovaro-neft starting its trading business. Dennis, how do you see the developments of this project? Hello. We are supporting initiatives. The initiatives been implemented by the SPyMex, and turning back to everything that has been already said and mentioned, well, trading for Russian oil companies, well, 2 years ago it was not developed, and now even can't say that it's very well developed, but anyway, it's a path to take, and we are developing, and in our companies we launched this area of commodity risks, and this helps us to develop and gives an impetus to accelerate our activities. So why we don't see the Urals development as a benchmark. So many times it was underlined that, well, towards liquidity and risk. But on the other hand, we realize that for liquidity to have, well, let's say, first of all, through international players, we need to, well, we should believe that and have all the instruments and tools that work in the long term. And as Ernest said, 2 years passed, and this is the factor of that our, well, trade market works really. And when players say that, well, markets really works, it gives some sort of a confidence. And for liquidity, you need risk, and it should be measurable, transparent, clear, and our regulators well say that we need state support for players to be sure that it will be realized. And besides, both markets and regulators take interest in the development of this instruments. And of course, we have to well, listen to all the players in order to adjust our norms and regulations for local players and international players. And I can say that regulators are quite flexible. A lot has been done. A lot of initiatives are under discussion on various platforms in order to make the market more attractive for international players. And this is just another step for future development of the commodity market and for the development of Ural as a benchmark, its involvement as a benchmark. And here we are ready to back up business initiatives. Well, what we need is transparent pricing and the management, a possibility to manage the processes. Maybe today it's not as clearly, well, measurable, but anyway, the profit that we are losing now, it's because of the fact that Urals is not a benchmark yet.
Thank you so much indeed. There is another interesting component from the standpoint of companies, you know. What do they need? Both companies and their employees working on trading must understand that they aren't going to be punished. Because, you know, market operations in the derivatives market, well, are risky. You can win or you could lose. But in the end of the day, well, economic accomplishments and, well, financial accomplishments are relevant for certain periods. Firstly, and secondly, there are certain things that cannot be brought down to economic operations. Well, if a price is fixed, then, well, if a price goes elsewhere, then it's not a direct loss. That understanding must be there. Well, people need to understand that this is a possibility, this is the right thing to do, because that's part of the business. That's very important too. Thank you so much. We have a new panelist, Pavel Sorokin. Mr. Sorokin, we've been talking about ways to accelerate introduction of Urals as a worldwide benchmark. And, well, we've been unanimous. We need transparency, we need stability and sustainability. So, in the opinion of the Minister of Energy, what does the process look like? What could you offer in order to mitigate the risk? Well, thank you so much. I'm lucky, you know, whenever I'm late, and whenever I join a session, it looks like I always bring stability with me. Ha ha ha. So, right you are. One of the main factors, and one of the factors the government, the businesses can impact is as follows. Quite often we complain and whine about external factors. Sometimes they are important. They put pressure on our companies, but we tend to forget about things we can change and alter. Taxation, regulations, they are very important when we launch new products and new projects. Well, we've been talking about, well, futures contracts for Urals and and ways to invigorate the exchange, if you know what I mean. Those are breakthrough projects, things we never had, things we want to accomplish. So we're chasing others, which means that there are people ahead of us. The Chicago exchange is ahead of us. The New York exchange is ahead of us. So we have to search for new ways because, well, they have their own connections with their traders and they aren't going to hand those over to us. But we have a lot of stuff to offer physically. Our market is huge. It's not even to be compared with that of Brent. We have resource base. We are well armored to take what's lawfully ours because in a way, you know, if the resource is ours, the suppliers are ours, if transportations are ours, why trade everything at an international, at a foreign exchange trading floor, and why use foreign indicators? So the issue of stability and sustainability is very important indeed. If we want people to speculate on the market, if we want speculations to take place, then we must render clear and comprehensible conditions, and we must make them understand which benefits they are going to have. By benefits, I mean absence of reduction of manipulations and creation of alternatives to well-known indicators. The WTI and Brent have been dominant on the market, and there have been no alternatives. But the question is, well, speculations cast a great impact on them. So very limited number of people know how those are defined. So consumers in Asia and in Russia would only benefit if an alternative indicator were to be launched. So the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service is working in that direction, but unfortunately the effort has been way too slow. Well, you need not to be a prophet to understand that. You know, we've been looking into that issue, and right after the completion of this Energy Week, we'll convene a series of meetings with companies in order to define specific steps in that direction, not just the roadmap. We want to try and handle this process in a manual mode, if you know what I mean, because, well, you need to have substance, you need to have essence for the process to evolve. You know, we need physical shipments to take place, and the suppliers, all oil companies, must not incur losses. We could promise them bright future and heaps of money, but that won't work. They will not work, and they will not get going unless we create an environment for them to work efficiently. So in the beginning, we're going to ask the Federal Anti-Monopoly Service, the exchange itself, and the Ministry of Energy to shove them in the direction of launching that process, and then we will work on efficiency. We need to reinforce our involvement with international traders for an exchange to become a live thing. Well, there must be a lot of interest to it, to a benchmark, and that is hard. People need to understand that well, their cash is going to be guaranteed, and that well, free conversion of currencies will be achievable, that well, cash withdrawals should be handled free, and that requires a lot of work with the authorities, because, like, you know, even if we say we must well, trade in rubles, well, that doesn't mean that everybody will do that. We have had countless examples of that promises are good and well, but you need to have incentives. quite often companies try to, well, sell to premium channels to, well, export, but everybody understands that an exchange is a must, a thing to have. But in the gas segment, that is not yet self-evident. So you can order what you want, but people will not follow. But with euros, it is our barn, you know, if you know what I mean. Our country is #1 world crude power, and the fact that we don't have a benchmark, an indicator for futures is not the right thing. We must come up with something, but that indicator, that benchmark must be efficient. I guess, well, you covered quite a lot while I was absent, but this is my vision: attraction of foreign investors, traders, manual handling of the process, and then engagement with regulators to make the companies see and realize the evident benefit. Well, all foreign panelists mentioned that the government must give the market a push. Oh, is that right? What is your ministry ready to offer to the companies? Well, you said that we must make them interested. That's my first question. And secondly, everybody said that there must be trust for liquidity to be generated. Under the current condition, trust looks somewhat difficult, and the Russian government says we are going to distance ourselves from the American dollar. So what do you see for SPyMax? Under the current condition, this isn't going to be a walk in the park. We need to realize that. And it will not happen overnight, because there are external trends we cannot control. We need to admit that this is going to be painful, because a ruble has been quite volatile, and investors, who are used to trading commodities in dollars, when they start switching over to a ruble, even with 30 days, not just 2-3 days, but 30 days, they will incur extra risks associated with fluctuation of exchange rates, which means that they need to be compensated, which means price discounts. But we do believe that, first of all, nobody knows how long the volatility will continue, but it will not be everlasting. In a couple of months it won't go away, but there will be a time when it will have gone, and we certainly hope that the efforts by the Ministry of Finance and the Central Bank of Russia will prove fruitful. They made quite a lot of efforts within the last 18 months, and the fact, the rate has and the inflation have been curbed somewhat. Those two factors are very important. They command investors rest assured that they can work here, but that situation needs to persist for 3-4 years. Hence my advice to work with financial authorities. And euros is a product to market, so it must not be an effort on the part of particular companies. It must be a collective effort. So the Ministry of Finance is ready to become a platform to unite the companies, the consumers, and the exchange in order to facilitate this joint effort. Because, assurance is an intangible thing. You cannot squeeze it, you cannot see it, you can only feel it. And it's quite often the case then one player issues a roadmap or something, or starts making effort, and the rest of players are unaware of that. So futures is a thing to have, and we are ready to become a platform for regular engagement and involvement of engagement of all the parties concerned. And because, well, with a lack of coordination, well, we could undermine our efforts. So we are ready to act in the capacity of a coordinator or aggregator, so to speak, and provide a platform for joint work and joint effort, because we need to make sure that our messages to the external market are well synchronized. We won't be able to remove volatility right away because, well, that thing is regulates itself. But we can show that everybody in Russia is on the same page, that people work together and strive together and move in the same direction. So, dear foreign investors, if you support us, you will have your benefits. This is a message we can send them. And we can also take steps to, well, facilitate trading here once the alternative is there. After that, there might be some regulations to make trading here in Russia mandatory. That might happen, but not in the near future. Right now, that wouldn't make sense. Once the intensive is there, then we'll talk to our foreign peers and say, well, look, Brent is 400,000 barrels. Here we have 3 million barrels, but, well, so the choice is yours. But for that, we need to create an environment. How come our oil companies have been so hesitant? Yes, they've been so hesitant to trade here because they're large and because, well, the oil sector in Russia is one of the most competitive ones. Why? Because it's a part of the global market, with the exception of fiscal. Gentlemen, could you please ask him to speak slower, because the translation is having major difficulties with the pace of his speech. Please. Я прошу прощения.
Помедленнее немножко.
I can speak English if you want, you know. So
It's not for me, it's for the translator. He's just requested.
Да.
Yes. So, with over-the-top limitations and with extra burden on oil companies, they will lose their competitive edge. And the loss of competitive edge in the most competitive sector with the largest financial resource in Russia would constitute a blow, not just in terms of energy security, but overall security on the international markets. So, twisting arms of companies and making them do what is not in their interest is counterproductive. We can send them signals and messages that prices should grow in line with inflation, that we could say, but limiting their activities abroad and where they compete with experienced and selfish players from abroad pursuing their benefits, we must not do that. So that is why my declaration that we first have to create advantages here. If a company trades here and makes extra 30 cents per barrel without that element of discount, then that would be 30 cents in their pocket, of which 23 cents will go to the government. We have to strive that's self-evident, but we expect to see a fair price for euros, not the one set by 2 or 3 agencies, but a fair one. And if it is going to be 50 cents less, then the price will be too high, and that will put both the companies and the state budget in jeopardy. So right now I am in no position to blame the companies for their unwillingness to trade there. We haven't done a good job persuading them. We need to work there to convince them. Well, that's a healthy approach. Show benefits rather than twisting arms. Could I make a tiny comment, please? When it comes to the issue of sluggishness, the businesses must restructure themselves to their business model. Transneft, for instance, it used to be a natural monopoly, but now it has the status of a commodity supply operator. It is going to get involved in clearing activities. That means new type of business. Companies must have to restructure themselves internally. Well, now these days they have risk management units, taxation units. That's fine-tuning, and exchange trading is not just limited to contracts. That means a lot of tweaking. That means a lot of restructuring and changing systems. Sometimes, well, the changes are intangible, but they are very substantial. Oh, yes, right you are. Sergey, you also represent a guarantor of the euro's stability and consistency. Well, I am going, yes, to speak for everyone. Yes, indeed, we understand that one of the important drivers of our benchmark would be stability and consistency and sustainability of supplies that we realize. When it comes to volumes, then the start point selected by the exchange is has been quite stable. There have been slight fluctuations driven by subjective reasons. Well, firstly, increase of refining volumes in Russia, refining has bounced back to the level of 2015 and 16. Some resources were rerouted in 2018 from the west to the east to honor the intergovernmental agreement signed by Russia. But we still forecast 37 million tons for Primorsk, plus for the Baltics. Well, there is another port, Ust-Luga, and whose capacity is roughly 36 million tons per annum, and some other important destinations are Novorossiysk too, of course, the Black Sea. So in physical terms, we see no risks whatsoever in that area. When it comes to the other component, the quality, that is the area where certain factors are evident. The quality of feedstock of stuff has been deteriorating, and our company has been working with the ministry and other oil company. Our oil company, we have a standing working group which constantly monitors flows of Russian export crude and flows of Russian crude processed in Russia. Our company pursues a number of projects to maintain the level of quality prescribed by per the current scheme. Nonetheless, in the future, there may be certain factors triggering that might push us beyond the reference point set for euros. As I said, together with the Ministry of Energy, we have been looking into a variety of options. But, I would say that Transneft is an expert, is a subject matter expert, and I am afraid we will still have to handle sour crude flows separately, which should help us stabilize the quality both for supplies to the Russian refineries and for supplies to the major export destinations. We'll see how things go, because the deadline for the decision is getting closer and closer, and I hope we will be able to reach a mutually acceptable decision. Which stage are you in? We've been working very active discussions at the ministry level and the government level. In terms of technology, how much time would you need to have to realize that once the decision is made, that we would require 36 months to realize it and handle our crude separately, a considerable time. Well, that is no walk in the park, piece of cake, because roughly 36 million tons is the capacity of Ust-Luga. We have to take sour crude out of the system and handle it separately. That would require some major construction and extra tank farms, extra pump stations, extra technical solutions to implement. And the important thing is to find a source of funds, because with our program did not have such things. So we are going to talk about that with the ministry and the government. Do you think market players will be ready to support you? Life will make them. The feedstock in Russia, they are used to handle feedstock of certain quality. Once the quality starts deteriorating, they will be compelled to work on their operational assets. So refineries, they count their pennies too, and they will see which is most beneficial. Thank you very much. Now I would like to give the floor to Marat. He represents a young yet very successful logistics operator. Your vision, please, of the prospects for the market. Thank you. The panelists talked about the Urals benchmark quite a lot, so I guess I will focus on the future of oil trading and the application of digital technologies. The world is rapidly changing, and the oil trading business must follow. So what can be done? What is to be done in order to optimize the trading? Well, some of my ideas might be questionable, but nonetheless, let's talk about them. Well, theoretical, benchmark system is obsolete, so we must focus on pricing indicators for real price, for real grades of crude.
So we are working on the Caspian region, Black and Caspian Sea, and what we see on our part, some 5 or 6 main grade of oils that are exported. So, previously it was not possible to create benchmarks and follow them all in terms of grade of oils, but thanks to new technologies we can do so now. Some rundown about history. The Russian scientist Mendeleev once said that to burn oil is to burn paper notes, banknotes. So time has changed, but we still, to some extent, in the past. So the idea is that we can create a unique, single database, on the regional basis, then maybe on global. So database including quality and volumes of all oil produced and exported, all the information on refineries, on markets, on oil products. We need refinery component here, because for each grade of oil has its own refinery to derive the maximum results. And sometimes it's useless to deliver oil to a wrong, let's say, refinery. So next, we can cooperate with Argus and the like in order to integrate into this database, and later on to launch this system of artificial intellect and for intellect in order to calculate well in advance which oil will go to which, let's say, refinery. So we are not limited to 30 cents or $1 per barrel. As we see, the economic effect can be from $3 to $5 per barrel. For the Caspian Sea, $2.5 billion per year. So, well, this work is underway, and in our company, in terms of oil products, we are creating this system, and we can do the same, to add the component of refining. That's for artificial intellect. As for the blockchain technologies, which is high on the agenda in every discussion, how to use it in trading system. Well, today we have an idea that we can implement the marker system for oil which is developed somewhere. We add some additives in very small concentrations. Then we can really track the fate, let's say, of this oil. All the way it's transported, etc., etc. So refining, then the end user, and this will allow to have transparency on the oil market, because everybody will know, well, by buying, will understand, will know the composition of this oil. Because it happens very often that oil is not clean, has a lot of additives, the composition is not 100%, and this is bad for refineries, and therefore we will have transparency as a result, and there's confidence in the good, conscientious work of refining, and this system also will enable us to optimize, to streamline, or to add, if you like, a profitable aspect, and as a result, the budget of it's a good sign for budgets. We're speaking of the billions of dollars per year. We're speaking dollars per barrel. So two ideas which, from our point of view, can be implemented, and we are ready to implement them if our colleagues, our partners, our rivals are ready to participate. We're ready to cooperate, but this is the subject for a very small, for another thing. Joe, a few words about blockchain. Will it be implemented soon?
So, S&P Global Platts has already, I'm quite proud to say, been the first implementer of an energy solution involving blockchain for the port of Fujairah, where storage data is submitted via the blockchain and shared in that way. So it's a small step, but blockchain is a very fashionable term, of course, as Murat rightly says. And I think it has the ability to revolutionize the back office elements, but I don't think it's a replacement for oil trading, for exchanges. Essentially, it's a piece of middle and back office software that is has the potential to streamline so many things. But at this point, it's certainly not going to replace what my company does, what Owen's company does, but will certainly add as a very useful streamlining tool. I mean, there are other projects around, such as the excess power production in the port of Rotterdam, for example, where they can net it out against each other, and they're using blockchain solutions for that. So I'd be very interested to see over the next few years how the applications can really take hold in companies like Transneft, Shell, companies like this that could really employ it, because I'm sure they're looking at it. Yeah. I've no doubt. I'm not going to challenge Mark on the applications at this point, but I'm sure that he has people working behind the scenes, seeing where the applications of blockchain can really work. And we've seen it. Of course, there was an alliance of various energy and trading companies investigating this a year and a half ago, and there are advances being made. But it's a wait and see for me.
Спасибо большое. Мы вынуждены закончить это.
Well, thank you. We have to wrap up this discussion. Very fruitful, very interesting. We were very optimistic during the discussion, and it's good that in terms of turbulence and uncertainties, we really have these new instruments which come to the fore, new tools which in some years will be full-fledged players on the market. And I would like to thank all the participants. I'd like to thank Alexei that you came here. I would like to thank all the international participants who really supporting our initiatives. At the end of this, at this roundtable, we have a signing ceremony for the memorandum of agreement. I'd like to ask Martin Frankel, support this initiative. Martin, please. Okay, there's a signing ceremony on memorandum on understanding. I'd like to ask you to sign the memorandum and please exchange the documents, exchange the files. Okay, let's welcome this very turning point, turning moment, defining moment. So we congratulate you, and I'd like to thank all the participants. We don't, unfortunately, have time for question-answer session. Thank you.